Hello, everyone. Okay, I hope a few more people join us, but let's get started now because it is 1 p.m. in Alberta. And I want to thank all of you here on the line for joining us for our third webinar this fall, spotlighting the after school time period. And can you all hear me okay? Can I get a couple hand raises from the participants if you can hear me okay? Yay! Okay, great, guys. So, Everactive Schools would first like to thank our provincial after school partners as well as the Government of Alberta, Lynn, for supporting these webinars, and of course, our amazing facilitators. Today on the agenda facilitating, we have Brenda Hirschmer. She is the owner of Grassroots Enterprises and the principal collaborator at Campus for Communities, which is an emerging social enterprise. Her primary work involves community building and comprehensive community transformation and the change process and leadership it requires. Today, she's going to walk us through understanding the value of evaluation in after school initiatives. And I'm going to hand it right over to you, Brenda.
Thanks, Caitlin. Hi, everyone. This is Brenda Hertzmer. I'm really excited to be here talking about evaluation, and I'm guessing you probably don't think that's an exciting topic, but hopefully by the end of this you will. I didn't used to think it was exciting either, but I do now. So this is about whether or not you're making a difference and understanding the value of evaluation in after-school initiatives. My guess is that yes, you are making a difference. I know that we're not always able to prove it, and I can relate to when I was running after-school programs at the Boys and Girls Club. We knew we were making a difference, couldn't always prove it. So these are the tools that we want to make sure you have by the end of the day. Thank you as well. Just before I get started, I just really want to really commend Everactive Schools because too often we don't have a professional development budget, or the professional development budget, the training budget, is the first one that gets cut. So it's really exciting that Everactive School has stepped up to the plate and made this possible. So I think that's really quite exciting. So we're going to get started. And throughout, I guess I should also give you a heads up to let you know that it may sound like I'm talking to myself, but it's Jennifer that I'll be talking to. And Jennifer is with the Leisure Information Network, Jennifer Palche. And she is, without a doubt, the voice behind the curtain, that really helps us pull this all together from a technical point of view. So just before I start, I just want to make sure, can everyone hear me okay? And I'll do the same thing that Caitlin asked, is to have you go to the header where you see the little emoticon, and there's a little drop-down arrow beside that little androgynous person. And you can click on that and put your hand up. Yeah, so it sounds like sound is okay. And at any point during the webinar, if you have a question, or you just want to step up and say whether or not you agree or disagree, or if you need me to speak louder or speak softer, or if you want to applaud, we like applause too. There's an emoticon for that. So feel free to use those. I'll get us going in terms of telling you a little bit more about what this will be about, and then we'll do some quick introductions as well. So here's what we hope you will walk away with at the end of this hour and a half. It's really about understanding in a clearer way the different types of evaluation, some strategies for implementing an evaluation process for your after school if you haven't done that already. Although I should also tell you that while we're kind of focused today on evaluating after school initiatives, almost everything that we're sharing will also apply to any other project, program, or event, anything else that you're involved with and need to evaluate, which is pretty much a lot of different things. And we're going to give you some different methods for gathering data, some sample evaluation tools. And this is a lot in a very short time, and I do realize that. I think that the way I look at this is that my job is really to be, as a host, as a facilitator, is to be more of a curator. And so what I'm attempting to show you in this short period of time is really the picture on the top of the puzzle box, and give you some of the pieces of the puzzle to work with. But understanding as well that evaluation is a whole profession unto itself. And that's one of the reasons why I've included this link here for the Canadian Evaluation Society. because if you are interested in this topic, or if there's a need for an evaluator within your organization, then I'd really encourage you to go to their site and learn more. The Campus for Communities is also doing more training in the future. Dr. Tammy Horn is actually going to be doing a series of 5 webinars on evaluation for a certificate as well. So we realize it's a lot of information. There's a lot of slides, but don't panic about that, because a lot of what we've included here are intended for you as resources that you can come back to. So there'll be things that you may want to reread that will make more sense as you actually start diving into evaluation if you haven't done that already. Just make sure that you have copies of the slides. I think they were sent out to you already. So Tanya, I just noted in the chat that you're having trouble hearing me. Hopefully that's a little bit better now. I'll use my cheerleader voice. Okay, but thanks for letting me know. Appreciate that. Okay, so there's our outcomes for today. Oops, and I'll just keep moving. What I'd like to do at this point is do a bit of a poll, because this is about you and a chance for you to introduce yourself, but it's also a chance for us to kind of wrap our head and start to think about evaluation. So 2 questions for you. One, what one word best describes your ability to evaluate? So where are you at? Oh, I love that. First one, right out of the gate. Overwhelmed. Yay. And the second question is, what do we need to evaluate? Why do we need to evaluate our after-school programs? Good. Okay. I can so relate to your answers so far to that first question. Overwhelmed, unsure, reluctant, learning. Good. You may have to use there's a slider bar on the right, very right of that, each poll question. So you may have to slide it down to see everyone's questions. Okay. Reluctant, inadequate, beginner, overwhelmed. Good words. Oh, I can so relate. I've been there for sure. But you do seem to understand, you have a good idea of why we need to evaluate our after-school programs. Yeah, if we don't measure, how are we ever going to know we've been successful? And yeah, it helps us improve. Great answers. Yeah, ensure developmentally friendly environments. Great answer. Good. Yeah, we've got to improve. We've got to make sure we're meeting the needs of our kids, to confirm that we're making progress. Great answers. To be better. Yeah. Now that's a very succinct way of explaining why we need to evaluate our after-school programs. Very good. Okay, so we're all kind of on the same page with that. And thank you for being so honest in terms of your responses. That really gives me an idea of where we are at and what I need to emphasize in terms of taking us forward. I think the one thing I really want to emphasize is that, I know that you have a lot on your plates right now, and I think a lot of times there's so many demands on us to know information about a lot of different things. So really what I'm trying to do more than anything with this webinar is help you speak the language of evaluators, to really maybe know what you don't know. And really a lot of that is what I didn't know and learned the hard way along the way. And I also just want to suggest that this may seem like a lot of work, but don't be intimidated, because I can also tell you that this will be the best time and energy that you ever invest, because ultimately this makes everything easier. And I know that's hard to believe, and you probably won't believe me until you go there, so I just want to encourage you to be open-minded about jumping into it. I know that it was hard for me when I first started. I think it was something that I didn't like or didn't think I liked when I started, but funders keep insisting on it, which is a good thing. But I finally drank the Kool-Aid, so I hope that you will as well. Okay, so why evaluate your after-school program? And it's clear that you have a good handle on why we need to do that by your answers. There's some additional thinking about this as well that I think will emphasize the importance of evaluation. It is a lot of times about learning and improving, about showing your funders what you're able to do, but it can also help with your marketing. It helps build support for sustainability. It helps us compare from year to year. It ensures accountability, all those kinds of things. I think it's also important to make success travel. I don't think any of us can afford to reinvent the wheel anymore. And so if we evaluate and figure out what's working, it's great then because it's something we can share with others. And Everactive Schools is doing a really good job of supporting after-school care providers so that as a community of practice so that they can keep learning from one another. So the evaluation helps us figure out what works so we can make success travel. This slide for me was an important one, although it took a lot longer to develop because I really had to sit back and think, okay, what are the issues? What are the challenges with evaluation? I think I could also call this slide "What I Learned by the Seat of My Pants," because this is really, in terms of evaluation, this is what I learned by the seat of my pants, and this is what we're seeing in general with evaluation, what the greatest challenges are. So this whole webinar is really laid out to address all 5 of these challenges. So the first issue that we see a lot of times is that, and I got to tell you, I was as much to blame as anybody for this approach, that I would leave evaluation to the very end. And that doesn't work. And I think we used to be able to get away with that a little bit, but accountability is on the rise. And so we can't leave evaluation to the very end when we kind of stop and say, okay, what did we do and how well did we do? We can't leave it to the end anymore. We've got to incorporate it in the very beginning. We've got to incorporate it into our planning, into our budgets, into the work plans of each team member from the beginning. The other thing that we don't always do is prioritize quantitative data over qualitative data. We're going to talk more about that. We too often confuse outputs with outcomes. We're going to clarify that. And we don't always understand the different types of evaluation, and we put too much emphasis on evaluating the process of what we do as opposed to the outcomes of what we do. So we're going to dive into that. And then we also don't always embrace the idea that we have to evaluate in more than one way, that we need to use a variety of different tools. So far, can you relate to those? Hands up if you can relate to these challenges. Good, okay. Okay, I think we're on the right path then. Good. Okay, at any point as well, if you have any questions, please use the chat. If something is not clear, or if you have a question or need clarification, please by all means use that chat, and I'll do my best to keep an eye on it. Okay, so where does evaluation fit in? And as I just suggested, that it has to be a component of effective planning. And so it really is about tracking, assessing, and forming opinions about your particular program, in this case after school. I think the best way, and Stephen Covey always said this, and I think it's something that's so important to keep in mind, that it's really about beginning with the end in mind. And that's why the evaluation piece is so important. Planning, when you look at the overall picture, is really about determining the outcomes or goals and how you're going to reach them. I think there's a lot of more complicated definitions of planning, but I really like thinking about this because about thinking about it in this way, because planning is really figuring out where you are now, where you want to go with your after-school program, and then the plan is for that gap in between where you are now and where you want to go. And so that's why, as you can see, evaluation is a part of planning, and you really can't separate the two. You can't do that. So you've got to think about evaluation as you're planning and rolling out your initiatives. So I want to get you thinking about this in terms of what you are doing right now with your after-school program. And I should also point out that on any slide where you see the word feedback in an orange font, that means you really, that's the interactive part. That means if you've been kind of nodding off before then, that's when I really need you to focus, because I'm going to ask you for your feedback. And our experience has been that that's really what is going to reinforce the learning about the topic. So Here's your questions. First one, how do you currently communicate the value of your after-school program? You know, people, to donors, to and elected officials, to other leaders in the community. How do you currently communicate the value of your school program? And the second question is, what are you collecting now? What are the most useful pieces of information that you collect to help increase the effectiveness of your program? So 2 questions. Okay? Oh, good. I just saw somebody using infographics. Good for you. And I think infographics, for those who aren't familiar with it, just the idea of a graphic, if you can explain in one page, people seem to have short attention spans and a lot of data overload. So if you can form some kind of graphic or diagram on one page that explains what you do, that's a really great approach. And I'm so happy to see that you're using testimonials. I think too often we forget about those, and yet they're so powerful. Yeah, you talk and you talk to those about your program and start conversations. I'm curious, what are those conversations about? What is it you're talking about that will convince them about the value? Okay, think about that. Yeah, good. So your annual general meeting, good, very good. Yeah. Okay. Yep. And as for keep thinking and add ideas as they come to. Okay. And as far as the kind of information that you're collecting now, attendance is good. That's a very typical response. That's really what we do in a lot of cases is track numbers. And I'm glad to know someone here has added that they're collecting alternate views and stories. Stories are so powerful. You know, when you think about, we're going to talk a little bit about that in this webinar as well. That's really how people learn. And that's really how if we can move people and educate them and create an awareness by using a story, that's huge, huge. Oh, and some of you are doing parent surveys, and some of you are, it sounds like you're tracking the child's experience in your program. That's good. Nice. Registration forms, good. Okay, so you are doing some forms of evaluation now, which is excellent. Okay, let's go back. We'll go back to the PowerPoint and talk about this in terms of the reality of what we're seeing everywhere, because I think you've just reflected the reality, is that typically we are using criteria that's a little bit more limited than it could be. And we tend to think about this in terms of what's more typical for business criteria. So if we track anything, this is what we typically see. We are tracking the number of participants in our programs, you know, the cost or subsidy per person, the percentage of participation, things that we can quantify. And that's why it's a bit limited, because it's not to say that it's not important to track the numbers, the quantitative data. But we sometimes forget about the qualitative data, which in many ways is more important. We're measuring, if we think about those numbers that we're measuring, the number of registrants, the revenue levels, we're actually measuring outputs there. We're not measuring the outcomes. So, and we'll explain that in a little bit more detail. But it just goes to show that there's more that we can and we should be doing, because we need to generate additional and what's complementary outcome-oriented indicators and measurement tools. And so by that I mean really what difference are we making in terms of children and youth, in terms of their skills, their knowledge, of the behaviors? What difference are we making? Not so much what we're doing, but what difference. So it's not the what we do, it's why we are doing it. And I think that's what we forget. And I know that I am definitely one of those who got so caught up in the what that I often forgot about why we were doing it. And that's quite typical. And I think it's really important to think about that from the beginning and think about the difference between quantitative data and qualitative data, as well as the difference between outcomes and output. So that's what we're going to do right now. And I am going to go to a poll in a little bit down the road, and ask you some questions about these subjects. So hopefully we'll be able to absorb these concepts if they're not already clear to you. But there is this issue between quantitative and qualitative data. So quantitative data, as we suggested, it's really about anything that you can measure, you can express it as a number, things that you can count. And we do this because it's easier. It's data that's about measuring. It's about the quantity of something. So it's about numbers in most cases. And so if we collect anything, that's usually where we start. We start with quantitative data. So qualitative data is different because it's not about the numbers. It's really about answering the question: Is it good? What's it like? It's about things that are more complex, like feelings and thoughts and behavior. So it's much more varied. Quantitative data, it's a number. It's pretty black and white. It is what it is. Qualitative data, there's much more variety. It often goes in much greater depth. A lot of times qualitative data typically includes interviews, and so you'll go deeper into the information. So that's why we need to think about this from the beginning, because we're not doing, and I think I can speak for most sectors, qualitative data, because it's more complicated and because we haven't really been trained to do it, it's not being done as well as it can be. But especially for something as organic as after-school recreation, we've got to think more about the qualitative data. Now, the second thing that we identified is in the measurement by your feedback is that we sometimes confuse outcomes versus outputs. And as I suggested, the outcomes are really about why something is being offered. It's not the what or how you do it. It's the ends versus the means. And that's a huge, huge difference. It also gets a little more complicated because you need to think about outcomes in terms of, are they short-term, are they immediate outcomes? Are kids going to walk away at the end of a few after-school programs with some outcomes, some changes in their knowledge or attitudes, or is it longer term? Is it more intermediate, or is it longer term? And that's one of the things that contributes to the complexity. If it's short term, it's usually, in a short term, all you can really do is change a child or a youth, their knowledge or their attitudes. If it's intermediate, it tends to be, that's where you can start to see changes in behavior. And if it's longer term, really at longer term is where you're going to make an impact, and you'll see a difference on a broader level in the community. So obviously outcomes are important, and yet we keep measuring outputs. And outputs are the things or activities that you do. And we keep measuring outputs and not always the outcomes. And one of the expressions and I don't even know if I made this up, but one of the expressions that I use that I think explains the difference in a good way is to say that outputs tell, but outcomes sell. The outputs really tell tell people what you're doing. So if you meet a funder or an elected official or community leader, you're generally telling them about your outputs. Outputs tell, but it's outcomes that sell the value of your program, and that's why that is so important. Yeah, and Cassie, you've brought up one of the existing tools, and that's one of the things that I want to stress is that you don't have to start from scratch. There are tools like High5 that can be used to collect qualitative data. And if you're using it, that's fabulous. I'm just not sure that everybody is using that. And I've got some other examples that I'll introduce to you as well. But thank you, Cassie, for bringing that up. That's great. Good. Okay, so a little bit more about outcomes and how to differentiate between outcomes and outputs. Because really, outcomes, I think, are really more about creating a better future. It's really about, and this is another thing that created complexity for me when I first started thinking about measurement and evaluation, is that you really have to think about measurement for the individuals, like for the kids in your program, which is really thinking about it, evaluation more at a micro level, but you also need to think about the broader community at a more macro level. And so, but I think generally in after school, what you want to focus on, especially at the beginning, is measurement and evaluation at the micro level, really the difference that you're making for participants. So outcomes really are, what are the desired end results? What are kids going to get out of your program when the difference between what they started with and what they end with, when they leave your program, what is going to be different? What difference is it going to make? If your funding was cut by 100% tomorrow, what difference is it going to make? So what? And if you can't answer that question with the outcomes that you deliver, then you are definitely at risk. So that's why we really have to spend the time thinking about this concept. And I think for me, I can tell you where this really kind of smacked me over the head. The first time I did evaluation work was with, well, it wasn't the first time, but one of the first times I got paid to do it as a consultant was working with a literacy coalition. And when we started, we did training similar to what we've just talked about now. And the people, they were generally staff people who worked for different literacy organizations. And we started talking about outcomes and outputs. And so I asked them about outcome. What was their outcomes? What did they deliver? What difference were they making? And they looked at me like I wasn't all that bright. But what they said was that, well, like duh, it's kind of like, well, we teach people to read. And you would think that that is simply the outcome of literacy organizations is teaching people to read. Well, when they actually went deeper into that conversation and started talking to their different stakeholders, the participants who they taught to read, they learned that their outcomes were far more than teaching people to read. Because when they asked participants what their takeaway was, it was a lot about other intangibles that were things like being less angry and less frustrated. They had better relationships with their family members, with their spouses, with their kids. They had better job opportunities. And one of the outcomes that came through, that was threaded through all of those discussions with their stakeholders, was that learning to read wasn't the outcome. What the outcome was increased hope for the future. That learning to read just gave them so much in terms of confidence and self-esteem that they walked away with hope for the future. That's a huge outcome. That's a huge selling feature. And yeah, for sure, not to say that the process of teaching people to read, like that, it's not to say the output of teaching people to read isn't important, because outputs tell, but it's the outcomes that sell. And that's what you have to make sure you can wrap your head around, is what's the end result? Why is what you do so important? What are kids going to walk away with at the end of your program? So the other thing to think about in terms of outcomes, and some of this will not make a heck of a lot of sense until you actually start diving down into it, but come back to this slide as you start to develop outcomes. But there are some key characteristics. In terms of one outcome can only state a single end state or a result. It has to be specify some expected direction, amount of change, performance-based, those kinds of things. But I think the characteristic that helps people get and understand when they have arrived at outcomes is that if you can control it, then it's not an outcome. If you can control it or do it, then it's an output or an activity. If you can only influence it, it's an outcome. So think about think about things like confidence or self-esteem. If that's an outcome, you can only influence that in kids. You can't control it or do it yourself. And so that's one of the ways that you'll know it's an outcome. Okay? So far, so good? Okay, let me just show you some sample outcomes, and then we're going to do, after that, we're going to do a poll to make sure this is understood, to make sure I've done a good job of explaining this. wasn't new to you. Um, this this information came from United Way in the United States, who have done a lot of really good work in terms of providing tools for outcome measurements and evaluation. A lot of the funding came from the Kellogg Foundation. But one of the things that they did that I think really helps people understand outcomes is that they talked about outcomes in terms of 7 different types. And that, I mean, this is a great way when you're actually sitting down to look at the outcomes of your after-school programs. Just look at each of these 7 categories and ask yourself, what are we doing in terms of outcomes related to knowledge? That's the first one. And then attitude, value, skill, behavior, condition, and status. And so you can have one or more outcomes for each of those categories, but I think those categories kind of help you think about outcomes by thinking about them in terms of those categories. So there's on this slide, there are just some examples of outcomes that you might be delivering, even not even having thought about it before now. But these are the kinds of things that you might be delivering, or could or should be delivering according to your priorities. But so, for instance, knowledge might be you may want kids to leave at the end of the program knowing how to make healthy nutritional choices. You might, in terms of their attitude, you might want them to recognize and recognize active living as being necessary for health. About being able to implement a homework timetable, that's a specific skill. Skills are the easiest ones to develop, that's for sure. And all of these are going to really vary depending on your particular program, but they'll give you an idea of what an outcome is. I think the thing that you really need to embrace is that this is not black and white, and it's almost experimental sometimes, but and part of it maybe is intuitive, but you're really thinking about this in terms of the category and what you are delivering as an outcome. I think the other thing that people get bogged down with is that they kind of think, well, how do we measure that if we can only influence it and not control it? And I think one of the most important things that I learned was to really, and this is again, that's why you need to think about evaluation from the very beginning. Think about this in terms of pre and post measurement. Use exactly the same survey tool in the very beginning, and then use it at the at the end of the program or several months down the road. Because what you can do then is quantify what really is qualitative data. So you can have someone, you can ask, you could design a quick quiz. It could just be some simple questions about nutrition, and have the kids fill out the survey at the very beginning, and then 2 months later have them do the same survey, and you can then show that there has been movement, and your program has influenced them in terms of making healthier nutritional choices. So that pre and post concept is really important, and I sure wish that somebody had told me more about that when I first started. So, okay, and I just want to just leave you with this one technique before I go to the poll, and it's a specific technique that I found to be the most useful in terms of getting past the what and the how-tos to the outcomes. So really what this is, and just try it with one of your peers. Ask them what they do. Ask someone a volunteer or a staff person who's involved with your after-school program, what do they do? And they will answer, they'll say, well, I run after-school programs for kids age 6 to 12. And when they give you that answer, ask them why, and then see what they say. And generally what we find is that you have to ask why 5 times, you'll get to an outcome if you use that technique. Okay? So any questions before we go to a poll? So I want to go to a poll and make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of quantitative data and qualitative data, as well as outcomes versus outputs, because that's what we've just focused on in the first section. about qualitative versus quantitative data, and we talked about outcomes versus outputs. So any questions about that? Or are you ready to jump into this poll? So this is the first one. Some of these are outcomes and some of these are outputs. And so check on all of those that you believe are outcomes. And I can see all your results so far. You can't see them yet, but I can tell you it's a pretty savvy group. This is good. Okay, I think we're almost there. So Jennifer, maybe you can just give it a minute or so and then broadcast the results. That'd be great. And everyone can see everyone's answers. There we go. So you should be able to see all of the results now. Okay, and it's clear, I think, for generally that you've got this. You got this. This is good. Nicely done. Okay, so the first one obviously is an output. It's qualitative data. The second one, and I think you all got that correct, is that the understanding of the importance of education. Yeah, that's an outcome. The third 85%, that's an output, so we didn't check that. Participants took part in structured physical activity each day. No, that's a how. That's a how. It's not necessarily an outcome. 15 participants from lower income families attended the program. That is an output as well. It's qualitative. It doesn't really say what they got out of it. It just says it's the how. It's really what they did. Doesn't tell you why it was important. Confidence, for sure. Confidence improvement, that's an outcome. Kids making positive use of their free time outside of the program. You all got that correct, and that's a great outcome, isn't it? And I don't even know that many of us think about making positive use of free time outside of the program important. I always laugh when I think about that because one of my best examples of kids not using their free time in a positive way was my son at one point after school. He and his buddy got a hold of a BB gun, and they went downstairs into his friend's basement, and in their infinite wisdom as 11-year-olds decided to start shooting canning jars with a BB gun. And one of the BB guns ricocheted off a canning jar and hit my son's friend in the mouth and knocked out his tooth. I thought, yeah, that was not a good use. It was not a positive use of free time. So yeah, but that would have been a really good outcome for them to have embraced. So good, and yeah, participants' sense of being part of a community was strengthened. Yes, that's an outcome. And presentations from a variety of community organizations were held. And that's almost an outcome, and that's why if you check that off, you're not really wrong. It needs to be worded differently to really be an outcome. It's pretty close to being, but right now it's really an output. Okay. Okay, so you are smart. Good for you. You got that. You got that. Okay, so let's go to thinking about kind of summarizing what we've learned so far about evaluation. So I'll go back to the PowerPoint. There we go. And this just kind of wraps up what we've done so far. This is really that underlying understanding of effective evaluation. Just keep this in mind. If you don't take anything else away from this webinar today, really embrace this understanding that your stakeholders don't buy into what you do. They buy into why you do it. So you've just got to keep focusing on why this program. It's not about the activities or the things. I mean, we've got to measure that, but it's really about why you're doing it. What's the end result? Okay? So any questions or thoughts so far? Yes. Thank you, Tanya, for the comment. Yes. Jennifer, I don't know if everyone has got the PowerPoint slides so far, but I know that Jennifer will make sure that you do. She's typing now, so I'm sure there's an answer coming. Okay, so while we respond to that, just rest assured that yes, you will all get the PowerPoint slides, and you'll have this to refer to. And plus, you'll have my email address. So if you have any questions about any of this, I really like getting emails. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have too. I wanted to just include this one slide because I think it can explain and wrap up a lot of the challenges that we're having with evaluation and why we need to shift the emphasis. Because when you look at this, when you look at the vertical axis here, the the we're looking at the two different kinds of evaluation that we just talked about, outcomes versus process. That's on the vertical axis. And then we've talked about quantitative versus qualitative evaluation. And what that has ended up with, it falls and ends up describing four different kinds of evaluation, depending on whether we're emphasizing the outcomes or the process, and whether we're emphasizing quantitative data versus qualitative data. And so that ends up with four kinds of evaluation. So if you start in the upper left-hand quadrant, if you are focusing on evaluating the process and the quantitative data, we're really evaluating how much service we delivered. And so that's where we're counting the number of participants, the activities, the increase in the number of participants. That's usually where we place our emphasis. But really, in the whole scheme of things, that's probably the least important kind of evaluation. The second most important is the top row on the right, where we are looking at measuring the qualitative data and the process. So we're really saying how well did we deliver? And that's the second most important kind of evaluation. And my guess is that you are all doing a lot of those two kinds of evaluation where we're suggesting that you place more emphasis and where your funders, without a doubt, want you to place more emphasis, really are on the third and the fourth. So they want you to emphasize measuring the outcomes from a quantitative, both a quantitative and a qualitative point of view. So how much for the better, how much change for the better did we produce, and what was the quality of that change for the better? Because that's probably the most important kind of evaluation. Okay, so that's the summary of the different kinds of evaluation. Think about that when you're thinking about what you want to emphasize in the future in terms of evaluation. Ultimately, it comes down to this slide, and I love this quote from United Way because I think it sums it up, especially for anyone who's working with kids. That really, it's not how many worms the bird feeds its young, but it's how well the fledgling flies. Because isn't that ultimately what we want to do? We really want kids to be able to fly. Not literally, but you know what I mean. Okay? Okay, so we're going to take a deep breath because we're going to change subjects, and we're now going to talk about different types of evaluation. And again, what I'm going to do to reinforce this learning, and no one's going to force you to participate in the poll, in the quiz at the end of this, but we've really just learned that it's a really good way to reinforce and solidify the learning because this is such an important topic. So hopefully this will make sense, and at the end you can answer the questions and reinforce that you've got this. Okay, so this for me, honestly, I didn't really get this for the longest time, and I truly wish I had learned this earlier. It would have made so many things so much simpler, especially when I'm thinking about the projects that I was a part of and really didn't do as good a job as I could have with the evaluation. But it's really just important to think about the different types of evaluation. I use the acronym POD to remember the three different kinds. But this is fundamental to understanding how to evaluate and being able to differentiate between the different types of evaluation because there's a time and a place for each of these types of evaluation. See why I said this was complicated? I mean, there's a lot to this whole subject of evaluation. It's not impossible to understand, and hopefully webinar is going to simplify some of that for you, but there are three different types of evaluation. Process evaluation is often referred to in the academic world or even in the evaluation world as being formative. So you need to think about formative or process evaluation, and really what that's telling you is it's really about refinements, whereas outcome or summative evaluation is about judging the worth of what you've done. And developmental evaluation is something that's has evolved more recently, and it's really more about learning and improving. And we're going to talk about each of those in an expanded way. So first of all, and this is one that we probably do the most of. I mean, we used to do it. I didn't even know it was called process evaluation or formative evaluation. But it's really about documenting and kind of assessing the program or the initiative as it's being implemented. So really, you're focusing on measuring and evaluating the process and the outputs, really what it is you're doing. So you're really measuring to say, did you do what you said you were going to do? Did you hit your targets? Did you implement the strategies you said you were going to implement? You do it usually at the end of the program or the project, and it looks at the whole project from start to finish. And it's important as a form of evaluation because it gives you information about how best to revise and modify your program. So you run the after-school program once, you do the evaluation, you gather the feedback. It'll tell you what worked, what didn't work, and how you can revise and modify it to be improved. So that's process or formative evaluation. It's probably the one that you already have done a fair bit. Okay? I think the key to process evaluation really is thinking about it. Did you do what you said you were going to do? That's really why that kind of evaluation is important. Okay, so when you're doing formative evaluation, it's typically with such topics as are listed here. So even if you have this list of topics when you're thinking about evaluating, if you just think about, well, what's our reach? Think about it in terms of recruitment. Think about levels of participation and resources and the program activities and outputs, the issues, participants' concerns, the successes. And so you want to look at objectives for measuring in each of those different areas. So here's some examples of each of those categories. So each of these, there's an example of measurement objectives for each of those categories. So I don't need to spend a lot of time on it. This won't, it is really something that's intended as a reference. So when you start doing the evaluation, you'll have some examples to give you an idea what each of those categories could potentially mean. Just keep in mind, these are just examples. They're not the be-all and end-all, and they may or may not even be at all applicable to your after-school program. Okay? I really have to give props to the Royal Bank, who funds a lot of after-school programs, because a lot of these tools they've developed and have made available. They're actually part of if you get any RBC after-school funding from the Royal Bank, this is part of their actual application, their forms that they provide you with once you get funding. So they've tried to make it as easy as possible. But these are the kinds of tools. You probably have some of these already where you're really focused on the process of formative evaluation. So a lot of it really is about it's about quantifiable data, right? So this is really about the program start time, number of participants, age range, program leaders, all of that. Okay, so it's pretty pretty straightforward and pretty black and white in terms of measurement. This is another one from them. The RBC asks you just to, again, it's important to have it on record in terms of describing the different activities. And I think it's great that they've actually given you different categories because I think that's so important in terms of after-school programs. You know, kids are programmed so often to the extent where they don't have a lot of choice. And so RBC is indirectly stressing the idea that there needs to be variety so that kids have choice. So this is one of their evaluation forms. And there's a second page. As you can see, lots of different activities and topics. And they've asked, you know, how often is that being offered? So again, it's a great summary and it's a great piece of evidence to show and measure the process of your after-school program. Okay, and there's another one. So I know these are going by fast, but again, they're just intended as examples for you. And you can refer back to them when you're developing your own tools if you haven't done that already. I like this particular tool because it's pretty efficient. It's on one page. It provides a lot of information that can be summarized in a quick way on one page. Here's another one. This is a summer camp form, but again, in terms of being a pretty efficient tool to gather a lot of information from the process point of view about what you are doing, it's a really good tool. I think the other thing that I like about this, I like this section at the bottom where it says great quotes, and you've actually asked for permission on the actual evaluation form. These quotes may be used as testimonials in future promotional material. Please include your name. And so if people don't want their quote to be used, then they won't fill that out. But it gives you great information to use about your program. Okay? Again, this is another one from from RBC that they ask for in terms of process evaluation. So it's just general reporting. And again, gives you an idea of what you should be tracking and measuring. Okay? So we're going to move to the process or formative evaluation. And the second kind of evaluation that we're going to talk about is outcomes. So don't forget that process is really about the what of what you're doing, your process, the output, not the outcomes. It's really, did you do what you said you were going to do? That's the first kind of evaluation. The second one is about outcomes. It's often referred to by academics and evaluators as summative evaluation. This one is really important. We don't do it enough, but it's really answering the question, are you making a difference? So you plan this at the beginning and assess it at the end, and this is where you want to drill down into longer-term changes in terms of physical health and well-being and being involved in the community and improved quality of life, those kinds of things. So it's really about the difference that you're making. Now, if that's not confusing enough, it's also just important to understand that there are two kinds of summative evaluation, two kinds of outcome evaluation, but they are referred to as outcome evaluation or impact evaluation. There is some confusion because a lot of times those two terms are being used interchangeably. But here again, this is a reference for you. So if you get bogged down and if it's not clear, come back to this slide, and as it will help you understand the difference between outcomes and impact. So outcomes are really generally thought of in terms of the difference you're making immediately or on an intermediate basis. So this is really, this is things like increase in knowledge, change in attitude, change in behaviors, things like that. The impact evaluation is longer term. It's the longer term, deeper, broader changes. And I don't know if I would get too hung up on this, and the difference, because a lot of times the terms are being used interchangeably, but just know that in the literature there is a difference between the two, but don't get hung up on that. Okay, so here's from RBC an example of how they're asking after-school programs to collect information based on outcomes and impact. So it's pretty straightforward, I think, but it'll give you an idea, a starting point for outcomes. Okay, and here's some examples as well. So, and this is just to show you the difference between an outcome objective and impact objective. Okay, and again, it's a reference. It will help you when you get to that point in terms of your evaluation journey. And RBC they look at outcomes in terms of different areas, and this one is academic, but again, gives you some ideas. And here's one for social outcomes. See, so again, I'm just saying, it's like the high five example that was suggested. You don't have to start from scratch. There's a lot of really good tools out there, but if it's not something that you can impact, if you have time limitations, staff limitations, funding limitations, keep it simpler. It may not be possible for you to measure a lot of outcomes to really deliver and measure those outcomes. So start small and keep it simple. And here's another category: health and wellness, community impact. Okay, so some examples. But again, you can see these aren't about the process. These are about the end results, and that's why it's called summative evaluation or outcome evaluation. It's really about the difference that you're making. So you need different kinds of measurement to measure outputs versus outcomes. Okay, so any questions about those two so far? So far, so good. I guess the true test is going to be when we do that poll. We'll see how we have all fared. The third evaluation is probably a little simpler, I think, to understand, although the process of putting it into place is a bit challenging. It's called developmental evaluation, and it's really only surfaced, I think, fairly recently, as what we're as what we're trying to measure. A lot of times, is getting more complicated. So developmental evaluation is really, it's not about making a program better, like process evaluation. It's not so much about measuring outcomes. It's much more about learning when you're trying to do something that is more complicated. And it's generally involved where you're trying to do something that is more innovative and the direction is not clear. So, if your funders sign off on developmental evaluation, there's fewer expectations kind of up front, but it doesn't mean they aren't expecting results. It's just that the approach is more likely to be ready, fire, aim. Instead of ready, aim, fire, it's really ready, fire, aim. So it's learn and correct as you go. So you put something into place, you learn from it, then you adjust and move forward. So you might add a new element into your after-school program, a new activity, and you learn from it, and you may or may not adjust and then move forward. So sometimes it's 2 steps forward and a few steps back, and then back and forth, continually developing and adapting. It's not really structured. It's much more organic, but it will likely result in things that are much more innovative. And it really is more about, I think, about possibilities and vision. It's not. It really just isn't as straightforward when you start, but the results in almost every case are really much more transformative in nature. It's sometimes I think it's the way to really describe it is to think about it as kind of laying the track as the train is rolling. It really is taking a couple steps forward, adjusting, and then moving forward again. So in the The graphic, it kind of looks more like this. Traditional evaluation is planning, acting, and then evaluating, whereas these kind of happen alongside. And that's the difference with developmental evaluation. Okay, so here's the test, and I know it's afternoon, and it's probably been a long day for you, but let's give this a shot in terms of thinking about how much has we've absorbed in terms of the different kinds of evaluation. Okay, so jump to it, and I think we've got a total of 6 questions, I think. So we're going to do them 2 at a time. So maybe we'll do the first 2, and then we'll give you the right answers, and then we'll go to the next 2, and then the next 2. Okay? So the type of evaluation that provides information about how to modify a program or service. And then the second one, the type of evaluation that tells us whether or not we're making a difference. Okay. Looks like some of you are changing your answers. Thinking about it. Okay, Jennifer, do you want to broadcast the results of these 2? We'll take it from there. Thank you. Okay, so the type of evaluation that provides information about how to modify, key word there is modify. So that means we're not making big changes. We're simply trying to make something more efficient and effective. And if we're doing that, that's formative or process evaluation. So most of you got that right. Thank you. Good. And it's clear that you understand that evaluation that tells us whether or not we're making a difference, that is correct in that it's outcome evaluation or summative evaluation. That's the kind of evaluation that shows us whether or not we're making a difference. Good. Well, you guys are doing well. Okay, Jennifer, can you take us to the next 2? Okay, the type of evaluation that would tell us program outputs. And then the next one, the most common type of evaluation used within after-school settings. Okay, and we can broadcast the results. When we're measuring program outputs as opposed to outcomes, that is referred to as formative or process evaluation. We're measuring the process. We're measuring our how-to. We're not measuring the why. And that really is the most common type of evaluation that we're using, is formative or process evaluation. And look at how clever you are, because all of you got that right. Okay, next set of questions. There you go. Impact evaluation is a form of summative evaluation. True or false? And then the type of evaluation that is most likely to acknowledge intuitive learnings. Good. Oh, you guys are doing well. Yep, impact evaluation, true. We can broadcast the results and you can see how smart you all are because you all got that right. It's true. Impact evaluation is a form of summative evaluation, and the type of evaluation that is most likely to acknowledge intuitive learning. Summative evaluation does that to a certain extent, but the best form of evaluation for acknowledging and capitalizing on intuitive learnings really is developmental evaluation because it allows it to happen more intuitively and more organically. So very good. Okay. Woohoo. All right. Okay, so we have the fundamentals. We have the fundamentals in terms of the basic knowledge of what you need to know about evaluation. So the next question is, how the heck do we put it all together? Well, you may or may not have heard about logic models. I will tell you that while they are challenging to put together, they will make everything easier for you because in one page you have a summary, and this is a lot of times what is being referred to as an infographic is generally a logic model done in a more fun way with more graphics and color and different colored fonts. But ultimately it kind of looks like this. This is really important for funders, for your annual reports, for parents, um, for anyone who has a vested interest in your program. If you can do this on one page, it really explains everything that you do and why you do it. So the situation, the inputs, which is the inputs are really what time and money and partners and equipment you're putting into this. The outputs explain, and again, that's why the process measurement is important, explains what you do, and then the outcomes are broken down into short-term, medium, and long-term are there as well. So that's one example of a pretty basic logic model. And I've included a number of others as well so that you'll have some templates to work from. And there's no right or wrong, and I think sometimes there's so many examples that it almost provides a kind of analysis paralysis, but everything that you are doing. If you can figure out how to put it into a template, find the template that works for the specific program or event or initiative that you're involved with and put it together as a logic model. I think that just ultimately makes things so much easier. Here's a specific sample outcome mapping an after-school program. Okay, and again, some are going to be more complex than others. This one happens to be a pretty basic one, but there are others that are more complex. This is just a straight table. I mean, you can do this in Word. The headings are what's important to think about: the inputs, the activities, the outputs, outcomes, indicators, and results. The indicators are important. We haven't talked a lot about that. You'll see them evolving once you land on your outcomes here. The question is, well, how will I know? How will we know when that outcome has been delivered? And so here is an outcome. So, if students, your outcome is to have students' school performance improve. Well, how are you going to know when it's improved? Well, you're going to look at their report cards and show a percentage of improvement in core subjects or the test scores being increased. Okay, so this one is straight table, but it's pulling together everything that we've talked about so far in terms of outputs and outcomes and inputs, activities, pulling it all together in one place. There's the actual template for that. Another pretty basic template, and again, depending on the complexity of your program, sometimes it's best to start real simple. Sometimes, and again, I think sometimes it depends on your team and how you are wired. Some people are real happy with the messy big forest, the big picture, and others may need to focus just on one tree, and that's okay. But here's some options of some tools for you. Here's an example of one that is more complex. But what I did with it was provide you with more specific examples that were relevant to after school. So these are shown along the bottom row, and you would simply fill in the ones that really are applicable to your after-school program. Okay? Okay, so any questions about the logic models? And I don't, it's I'm not sure that anybody can really explain or really can learn what the ins and outs of a logic model until you actually do it. I've probably given you a lot more examples than I had when I first started, so hopefully it won't be quite as gray an area for you as it was for me, but it's just a case of making a commitment to doing it. And again, not easy, but really important work. Okay, so any questions about logic models? I'd also be really happy if anybody wanted to unmute their phone and ask any questions. It'd be nice to hear another voice. So if you don't want to type in a question, you can feel free to unmute your phone. Okay. Okay, so the rest, I'm just going to do this quickly, so you can kind of kick back a little bit and relax a little bit, because really what I'm going to flip through right now are a bunch of examples, and again, you don't need to embrace it on any deep level. We've done the heavy lifting in the webinar so far. This is just a case of letting you know what is out there, so that when you get to this point in your evaluation journey, you'll have resources and information to draw on. So we were going to go to, I think we were going to go to a poll here, Jennifer, or a whiteboard? Yeah, whiteboard. Yay! Okay, so here's the question for you, and I don't know how many of you have used the whiteboard before, but use your cursor, and if you want to just type, click on the T for text first, but if you want to be a little more ambitious, click on the second one from the top, which is the marker, and then you can do things freehand. But the question is, how do you gather the data? What are some of the tools that you could use to gather information, whether it's for a formative evaluation or a summative evaluation, whether you're collecting outcomes or measuring outcomes or outputs? What are some of the tools that you can use or have used or are using? Because I'm guessing that you're using some now. You've already provided some examples of some of the tools. How do you gather the data? I'm guessing survey says yes. And surveys are a really good way to go, especially now we can use SurveyMonkey and Survey Gizmo, and so it's so much easier. Yeah, and the high five is a form of a survey too. Interviews are great. Who are you going to interview? Yeah, you can interview the children. Who else can you interview? Ah, success stories. Good. Okay, what is Wufoo online? That's new to me. Okay, so can you explain that to me in more detail? You can unmute if it's easier, or type more information in the chat. Ah, good. You're interviewing program managers too. Good. Observing. Observing is an excellent tool. There's some great tools out there where you may observe a child's behavior in an objective way 1 week, and then several months later, objectively observe their behavior again. And if you can measure even on a scale of 1 to 10, you're able to really objectively describe and demonstrate that you've shown that your program has made a difference in their behavior. Oh, I'm so glad somebody mentioned photo telling. It's on my favorite list. The one, I don't know if anybody uses Photo Voice, but it's a great program. The one that somebody just cleared. Oh, there it's back. Oh, it's back. Thought we lost all of your important feedback there. Photo Voice is a great example of a program. I was working with a group just recently in the Yukon, and they used Photo Voice. They used it to have participants go out and take photographs of everything that they would consider to be recreation, and then they're all uploaded, and they end up telling a story with photographs. So it's the visuals are so important. It's a really great tool. And I'm glad you mentioned success stories and child storytelling through art. That's brilliant. Okay, yeah, it's a lot of these great tools. Good. I'm still curious about this Wufoo online. Oh, there you go. It's a registration online form. Thank y'all. Okay, so is that a proprietary form, or is it open source, something that other people could use? Thank you, Renee. Thank you for sharing. Perfect. So is it open to anyone? It's free, I'm thinking maybe, or might be proprietary. Ah, very good. Okay, thank you. It's free, and anyone can use it. See, that's fabulous. I love doing webinars because I think I learn something new every day. Okay, well, thank you for using the whiteboard, and thank you for sharing your ideas. And what you've demonstrated with your feedback is that there's a lot of different options that are out there that are available to us. There isn't one best way. There's many ways, and you've got to find the ways that work for you. So a lot of different tools. And if we go back to the PowerPoint, is a list of the favorite ones that I've used, but there are a lot of others as well. You can use any of these. Um, and I think you've mentioned most of them. But even simple things like comment cards or suggestion boxes or focus groups or open houses, you can gather information there. But a lot of different tools. These are some of my favorite actual techniques and tools. And any of these you can Google and find out more information. There's a lot of actually I have over 1,000 different facilitative tools on the Campus for Communities website. So a lot of times if you just Google, or sorry, if you don't Google, just search on the Campus for Communities website, you'll find a lot of different evaluation tools. So I think the more fun you can make it and the more creative you can be with the tools, the better response rate you're going to get. So I just encourage you to have some fun with it. I don't know that the tools always have to be really complicated. This one, I included this one because this one was used just with kids, and I liked it because it was quite simple, but it still is an effective evaluation tool because what they did was give a page like this to kids in the program and had them circle any of what they did and what they got out of the playground. In this case, it was a playground program, but it allows you to gather really important data and verify the outcomes that you were trying to deliver. Right? So really simple. Doesn't have to be complicated. But on the other hand, I mean, here's some ideas from this. These are straightforward and more simple ways that were developed by Pro for evaluation. It can be really simple things: thumbs up or thumbs down, smiley or frowning faces. Ask kids to choose simple descriptive words from a list at the end of each program. And sometimes it's just these conversations, and it's simple questions. What did you like best? How could we make it more fun? What other activities would you like to try? So it doesn't have to be complicated, but there are tools out there that can get to more complexity that can help you with that. So here's an example of there's a whole suite of play tools that I think are really good. This particular one deals with a lot of different topics around nutrition, healthy eating, physical activity levels, things like that. And again, this was developed by funders, by corporate sponsors and foundations and the Boys and Girls Club. So the tools are available online. Now, they might not work exactly right for you, but again, that's something that you can hopefully develop. And I guess I don't think I put the actual URL for this on it, but it's physicalliteracy.ca/play. So physicalliteracy.ca/play is where you'll find this suite of tools. And again, depending on what you figure out you need to evaluate, start Googling because those tools are out there based on what you've decided you need to measure. Okay, also just think it's really important to work at this from a team point of view. So if you haven't done a lot of evaluation, here's our best advice for getting started. And again, we don't have to go through all of this. We've covered most of it. But if you need to make a case for evaluation within your organization in terms of the how-to, how do you do it, here's the ideal 10 steps. You can't do it with one person. It has to be, the feedback for what you're going to evaluate has to come from a lot of different levels. So that's why the team approach is really important. So everyone comes at it with different lenses. So that's a resource for you. It's also really important to think about outcome harvesting when it comes time to pull all of your rights together, whether it's for your results, when it comes time to pull all your results together, whether it's something you're doing for your funder when you're submitting your final proposal, your results of your funding, or you're pulling something together for an annual report, you really need to think about outcome harvesting and how you can pull all of your different kinds of evaluation together in one report. So that's something that you want to think about, because it's a kind of a form of sleuthing for answers and drawing some conclusions based on all the different evaluation tools that you use. So I just wanted to stress that that's important. And there's some additional resource materials here for you too, and things that you need to think about as you're gathering data. So common errors in designing surveys. I also cannot stress enough the power of using stories. And so if you need to build in some time to gather stories, here's a slide to help you build the case for the importance of stories. That's really vital as well. Um, One of the things that I've started doing for the work that I've been involved with is really keeping a story file. And I would suggest that you do the same. Every time you hear a great testimonial or you hear a great story from a child who's really benefited from your program, make sure you write it down and keep track of it. So the next time you have to write a proposal or do a presentation or speak at your annual meeting, you can go to that file and you've got it at your fingertips, whether it's a story or a testimonial. But make sure you really focus on stories. Can't stress that part enough. And just more information, tips for telling stories, how to get to stories. And I love this quote from Robert McKee: storytelling is the most powerful way to put ideas into the world today. I think stories cut through the data tsunami that we're all experiencing. So I think stories is really how we can reach people and touch people's hearts, and that's what we've got to do. It is really tell our stories, and if we're not telling our stories, then who is? And I think sometimes we just don't take enough time to do that. So I just want to stress that storytelling piece, and also just leave you with this last quote. I think it's kind of funny in terms of that maybe dinosaurs would have had a better chance to survive if they'd evaluated climate changes a bit more carefully. There are more resources, and this is on, I think this is on the LIN website, and for sure there's a lot more information on onafterschool.ca. And I'll just leave you with that page, and I'll turn things back over to Caitlin to wrap up. Thanks. Oh, it's got an evaluation too. I think we probably need to switch to the evaluation. Thanks, Jennifer. And then over to Caitlin to wrap up. The time to do this evaluation is so important for us in terms of making sure we got it right. So thank you so much for participating, and thank you for being brave enough to sign up for a webinar and evaluation. It's been really enjoyable for me. Thanks so much, and have a great rest of the day. Caitlin.
Hi, thanks, Brenda. I think from the start of your presentation, it was pretty clear that many people on the line, this is a topic to them that they had a lot to learn. You definitely gave us a lot of information to start from and more places to go to look for more. So I think it was really great. Before I say goodbye to everyone, I would like to ask you to take a couple minutes to fill out the survey if you haven't already, and I'm just going to share a couple updates from Everactive Schools. So we're currently doing some work looking at school community partners, and one of the key opportunities for that is the after school time period, and we're collecting some surveys from those across the province, both from the school side and the community side. And I just have the link to that survey in the chat bar if you could take a few moments and go fill that out. And there is some entry for some prizes if you do take the time to fill it out. And also, we are hosting a pre-conference at our annual Shaping the Future conference this January, which will be on school community partnerships and highlighting some of the key opportunities there, the after-school time period being one of them. So if any of you were at our Shaping the Future conference last year, the pre-conference was on the after-school time period, which is kind of what brought forward all these webinars, which has been great. So the pre-conference this year will be on school community partnerships, and I've attached a link also in the chat bar, which can take you to find some more information on that. You can also, on the website, check out information or email me if you ever have any questions. And that is all I have. Thank you, Brenda, once again for the great webinar, and Jennifer for your great organizational skills. And I'll just kind of leave it open for a minute or two in case there's any questions before we all log off. Doesn't look like there are any questions, so thank you, everyone.